Last time on, the Odyssey. He's been stuck on Calypso's island for near a decade at this point, and a totally freak storm sweeps them out to sea to a land on some island full of very mellow dudes eating nothing but lotuses, which just happened to be the home of Polyphemus, a huge hungry cyclops who trapped them. Next they arrive on the island of Iolia, where the king gave him a magic bag with the power of wind. When they're nearly at Ithaca, the crew decides it isn't possible for the bag to hold the power of the wind, and they open it. The subsequent hurricane blew them all the way back to Iolia. We pick up with our intrepid explorers back on Iolia, after the idiot crew blew them all the way back with the magic bag of wind. So with this setback, how does Odysseus get back to Ithaca? Well, today we'll find out in this episode of the Odyssey. We left off with Odysseus and his crew sailing away from Iolia for the second time that day, and now, without the bag to speed them up, they had to go the long way round. So let's continue the series of unfortunate events that is the Odyssey. First, they decided to land on the island of Lastrigos, which just happened to be entirely populated by people eating giants. Wow, Odysseus really knows how to pick 'em. While some of the crew was being eaten, Odysseus and the rest of the crew ran back to the ship and sailed out to the next land of mythical horrors. This one was occupied by the sorceress Circe, who turned all the crew into pigs because, I don't know, it's probably meant to be symbolic, but it doesn't really explain it. But since Odysseus needed a crew with opposable thumbs, he went to get his crew de-pigified, and with a magical herb from the gods, he met with Circe who offered him a drink, and when he drank it didn't turn into a pig. She knew she had messed up. With that and a nice bit of persuasion, she transferred everyone back, and they stayed on the island for an entire year. Man, he's going to be really late. Eventually, Odysseus remembered, oh yeah, we're on a quest, and goes to ask Circe where to go next. He was like, yo, how do we get home? And Circe was like, oh, I don't know, you need to ask Tiresias. Oh, where is he? About 6 feet under. Right, boys, we're off to hell. And with that, they descended into Hades. One commune with the dead later, they find Tiresias, who tells them that they should be fine as long as they don't kill any of Helios's sacred sun cows. Hint, hint. So with that, they set sail on a very monster-infested route. First they go past the island of the Sirens, who make anyone who hear them singing suffer from a fatal case of disco fever and jump to their death. So, the crew covered their ears with wax to block out the sound, except for Odysseus, of course, who merely tied himself to the mast, and heard the sirens without being able to jump off the ship. After this, they sailed past Scylla and Charybdis, a six-headed Hydra-type deal and a whirlpool with teeth, respectively. They gunned it past Scylla, losing 6 of the crew in the process, and they land on the island of Thrinacia, home to these lovely cows as bright as the sun, which the idiot crew eat, despite Odysseus's complaints. And 10 points if you guessed it? Yep, those were those aforementioned sun cows, and the crew's gonna have a lot of trouble. Which came to a quick comeuppance when they set sail and Zeus struck them with a lightning bolt that disintegrated everything but Odysseus and the mast, which he subsequently sent him back to Charybdis, who devoured the rest of the mast and spat out some timber, which Odysseus used to paddle all the way to Calypso's island, and the rest is mythology. After this chunk of the book, it just cuts back, and you remember Odysseus has been telling this to the king of that island he had washed up on. So the king was like, dude, that's tragic. You want a boat? And Odysseus, who's been through too much at this time, replied, if you wouldn't mind, and slept the entire trip back to Ithaca. Which, I mean, fair enough. So he found his way home back to Ithaca. The adventure's over, and he can relax. Oh, you'd think that, wouldn't you? But nope. There's one itsy-bitsy problem left. The suitors in his home. So, Athena, the ever-crafty, has a plan. She disguises Odysseus and sends him to this swineherd, and she goes to bring Telemachus back, who also goes to the swineherd because that's a very obvious solution, where he meets his dad, in which Athena promptly takes away the disguise so we can have an emotional reunion. With that out of the way, they begin to scheme. The next day, Telemachus returned to the palace and told his mother of his adventures, minus the finding Odysseus bit. Meanwhile, Odysseus redisguised himself and makes his way to the palace, where he is immediately recognized by his old hunting dog, which promptly dies because the story can't leave Odysseus alone for 5 minutes. Later that night, Odysseus and Telemachus hide the suitors' weapons and go to talk to Penelope, who has a plan of her own. The next day, Penelope reveals her plan. Odysseus had this wicked reflex bow that no one but him had been able to string, much less use it. So, her challenge was that anyone who can string the bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axes, she would marry, because she would only marry a man like Odysseus, and only Odysseus could do that. And they would become the next king. All the suitors tried and failed, until Odysseus stepped up and was like, hey, can I try that? He strung the bow casually and shot an arrow through the axes, turns around and reveals himself, then proceeds to murder every suitor with the help of Telemachus. Ah, family bonding. And finally, Odysseus gets his happy ending. and I can finally justify spending 28 hours of my life listening to the audiobook. Ugh.